Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Family Photographs, establishing parental dominance since 1841. Now, let's dim the lights and say cheese.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Fragrant Whispers. The juicy grapes bursting from Blurry Hills vineyards relax to a glass of fragrant whispers. Welcome everyone to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we're filmmakers. Some of us going into more filmmaking than maybe before. TBD on that. And we like to, work in front of the camera, behind the camera, in all phases of production really, and use that as a inroad to talk about films and maybe what they're doing, how they work, and maybe how they don't work sometimes. And just kind of looking at everything on its face instead of pulling back the layers of what was intended and what a director says in an interview. That's all fine and dandy, but we're more interested in what can we pull away from just watching the movie, and then what layers can we then pull back from that alone. And that's always an interesting approach. So I don't know. I think there's a lot to maybe discuss today. To be honest, I don't really I have a bunch of notes, and I'm kind of going to try to not look at any of them. Because of the movie we're talking about today, which is what, my friend?
Today, we are finally, after 297 episodes, covering 2001: A Space Odyssey. So if you haven't seen the film, please pause it and go watch it. I think it's maybe streaming on Max at the time of recording this, because we don't want to spoil a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I guess. We'll look at probably a bunch of things, TBD, but I think we'll discuss. There's one thing I kind of want to talk about in cinematography on a very big, broad level. But then also we'll try to dive into some story and writing and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. When a mysterious artifact is uncovered on the moon, a spacecraft manned by 2 humans and 1 supercomputer is sent to Jupiter to find its origins. It's directed by Stanley Kubrick, screenplay by Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, cinematography by Geoffrey Unsworth, and it's featuring Keir as Dr. Dave Bowman, William Sylvester as Dr. Floyd, and Douglas Rain as HAL 9000.
The HAL 9000 computer, which can reproduce, though some experts still prefer to use the word mimic, most of the activities of the human brain, and with incalculably greater speed and reliability. We next spoke with the HAL 9000 computer, whom we learned one addresses as Hal. Good afternoon, Hal. How's everything going?
Good afternoon, Mr. Raymer. Everything is going extremely well.
Hal, you have an enormous responsibility on this mission. In many ways, perhaps the greatest responsibility of any single mission element. You're the brain and central nervous system of the ship, and your responsibilities include watching over the men in hibernation. Does this ever cause you any lack of confidence?
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.
Hal, despite your enormous intellect, are you ever frustrated by your dependence on people to carry out actions?
Not in the slightest bit. I enjoy working with people. I have a stimulating relationship with Dr. Poole and Dr. Bowman. My mission responsibilities range over the entire operation of the ship, so I am constantly occupied. I am putting myself to the fullest possible use, which is all I think that any conscious entity can ever hope to do.
Dr. Poole, what's it like living for the better part of a year in such close proximity with Hal?
Well, it's pretty close to what you said about him earlier. He is just like a 6th member of the crew. You very quickly get adjusted to the idea that he talks, and you think of him really just as another person.
In talking to the computer, one gets the sense that he is capable of emotional responses. For example, when I asked him about his abilities, I sensed a certain pride in his answer about his accuracy and perfection. Do you believe that Hal has genuine emotions?
Well, he acts like he has genuine emotions. Of course, he's programmed that way to make it easier for us to talk to him. But as to whether or not he has real feelings is something I don't think anyone can truthfully answer.
Interesting. If true. So I think you have seen this once before and it was relatively recent. And for me, this is a film that I think operates best in a theater, kind of like Blade Runner, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, just because it's so dry at times that if you can shut yourself off away from cell phones and distractions or temptations of distractions, like it's a much better experience to just fully sit and engage, because there's so many moments of silence and slow shots that if you can get yourself to just sit and focus, it becomes more rewarding the more you're able to do that. And so I'm a big fan of that, approach to viewing this. And yet, this is probably my third or fourth go around. Like I've got to see this in a 70 millimeter, at one point. I tried to do it once before. They were playing an old copy. They're like, actually, we can't play it. They canceled the night before 10 minutes into the film. They're like, yeah, this isn't working. We're going to have to cancel this showing. It was rough. It was funny, but also like, this is the price of admission on this kind of project. So what's your experience with this now, watching it for the second time? And this has got so much, I don't know if we should call it baggage, but it's one of the most famous sci-fi films of all time. If not objectively, one of the top 2 or 3. Like you'd have to talk about Metropolis, and I haven't even watched Metropolis, to be honest. So like walking into this with all these expectations and then actually sitting and watching it, what do you take away? What's that experience like for you?
No, I can see why this is a difficult film to cover, because, like you said before, one of the reasons why it's taken this long for us to do it is because everybody's, already said everything that there needs to be said about 2001, and it's a masterpiece in itself and stuff. And you remember when, it was made, like how they did this. I still honestly don't know. What year was it? Did it come out again? It
68.
Was,
1968.
Sorry, what?
1968.
68. So keep in mind what was happening. Space race, right? We went to the moon in 69. Everyone thought, okay, well, this is the jumping off point to the stars, right? Of course we'll be going to Jupiter right after that, and of course we're going to go to the moon and find something, right? And like all of these things. We'll be able to dig down into the moon lunar surface, and we'll be able to, construct, underground space stations. And of course, in 2001, 30 years later, of course we're going to be able to do that. So yeah. And there were a lot of things that I noticed the second viewing. So the first time I viewed it, I thought it was wonderful, amazing, and not like super slow, but slow with payoffs. Slow for the sake of slow sucks and is boring and annoying, but this was slow, and then you get incredible shots, which come to find out are like, it was all filmed on a soundstage, which is crazy. So crazy. So they used a projector to film those opening shots, and which is one of the reasons why the camera is still, because otherwise it would give it away. So the camera is just locked off, and they shine this projection onto this screen behind everything, and that's one of the reasons why the leopard's eyes glow, is because it's the light from the projector. Which I thought, how do they make that? How do they do that in post? In 1968, how do you, but it's the light from the projector. Anyway, there were a few things that I noticed. My favorite part of this whole movie is the whole beginning. What?
Sorry. Yeah, the leopard thing. You're saying they did what with it? So I was super curious about shooting a leopard attacking a guy in a monkey suit.
Oh, I don't know how they did that.
So
yeah.
I looked up because I was just like, what the actual, this thing looks like it's going for it. And I was like, did he just throw a leopard at this guy? Like, what? Because Kubrick has a reputation of being a little unhinged. And so I had to look that one up, and there's like the guy in the suit that did an interview, who wrote a book in 2001, actually, or 2002, that got released, his memoir about making this film. And that whole backstory, and someone then recently, within like the last 2 years, when interviewed that guy, like, hey, can we just talk about that specific scene, the leopard scene? And a number of things came out of that little section. One was that those guys in the beginning, that first 20 minutes, spent 4 months, I think it was about 4 months, studying videotape of how apes move. Like 4 months watching like these captured in the wild hidden cameras that were, which you think back to the 60s, that's pretty insane. And so that they could study and mimic their moves. Their movements are freaking out of this world. Like,
out of this world. Yeah.
I was watching them thinking like, how that's so good. Just the erratic nature and kind of the way they're debating touching the thing, and like all their movements felt really crazy good, to the point where part of me was just like, I know these aren't actual like apes or anything, but what is going on here? And so, yeah, they studied all that. And then the other thing that was happening in the background was there was a animal trainer working with a leopard and a lion on that attack sequence. And so they spent over a year, I want to say, training that specific scene. And then towards game time, Kubrick looked at both of them, said, let's go with the leopard. I think he just thought it looked more exotic and interesting. And so they get on set to shoot that scene. And this is literally the only thing I researched. I was afraid that he really just unleashed a leopard on a guy. So yeah. I was just like, for my own peace of mind, I just need to know what actually happened in there. And so they get on set, and now the thing is, they've, I think, constructed this set so that they could control the environment a little bit more. But now instead, this leopard operating in this kind of vacuum, there's a whole crew, there's cameras, there's huge lights. And the leopard kind of freaks out a little bit, and even Kubrick is like, I don't want to get anywhere near that thing, which is, I will say as a director, that's bullshit. And so anyway, he is timid to the point where he's like, I think they did 3 takes. And that first take didn't work. And they're like, what do we do? And they give the trainer some time to work and calm down and talk to the leopard. And then they do the next take. And this is the one they end up using. That doesn't go perfectly to plan. And I think they said they tried one more that also didn't work. The leopard was still reacting a little strongly towards the crew and everything. That first take, I want to say, he didn't jump on the guy at all. He jumped halfway between the camera and that guy. And that freaked everyone out. So really interesting. But part of the thing that they didn't expect, and they were in dailies watching the rushes of those takes, was that leopard looking up and looking towards camera. They didn't expect that to happen. And that, created whatever, if that was the projection, which would make sense. I mean, largely those are beams, right, that are reflecting off the back of the eye. And if you do it at the right position, it'll hit the camera in a really interesting way. And the team thought, oh, we can't use that. And Kubrick's like, no, we're keeping that. And so that was a really, I don't know how the projector operated and all that. Maybe that's like casting onto the sky in the background, creating that stuff. I have no idea, but it makes me want to now go back and look at more of what they were doing in those opening sequences, or throughout the whole film, probably, because this probably is all in a soundstage. Yeah.
I mean, it pretty much was for like a year and a half. They're just like filming in the soundstage. Anyway, but so much, all of my notes are from this first section, this first I guess quarter, eighth, I don't know, whatever.
All the way
however
through
long
like
it
the
is.
moon.
Until the moon. Yes. So, okay, we'll start from the beginning. I feel like we're on these really long lenses, right? Which feels really voyeuristic. You know, everything is, first off, you know, we open on these beautiful landscapes. And even if it is, you know, projection or something, somebody got these shots. Like these are real shots of like places on Earth, and they look barren, you know, and vast and gigantic and just so beautiful. And they're still, and there's something magical. I think I saw an interview with Spielberg or something. It's like, even when a camera is fully still and nothing is moving in frame, you can tell it's a video. You can, you know, especially when on film. That's the difference between film and digital, is that nothing could be moving, but you can tell that it's film, and it's beautiful. And so he uses that, right? We see these barren, huge landscapes, and then we see these apes. And I feel like, especially in a couple of shots, the camera is super low to the ground. So you have this kind of bokeh in the foreground, but you're focused on the apes in like farther back, right? So you have this kind of, your eye is going to the apes because it's out of focus everywhere else. It's kind of like this weird thing because the lens is super long, but where the camera's really low. So everything is kind of fuzzy towards the bottom of the screen, but then you see the apes, you know, like focused in the background. It's just, I'm remembering this is 1968 and it looks like we're on like 100 millimeter, 300 millimeter longer, like super long. And just, it's so beautiful. And I can't recall any other film, you know, for maybe the next 15 years that does something like stuff like that. Right. So that's the first thing I noticed, is that you feel very like, I'm not supposed to be here and I'm seeing this, but maybe I should, you know, I'm from a safe distance kind of, you know, the camera's locked off, so we're not moving and we look very far away. So I feel a little safe, but a little voyeuristic. And then the obelisk being there felt very, the second time I view it, the first time I view it, I'm just watching what's happening, right? The second time I see it, I'm watching for more substance. Like, that's why you watch films twice before we do these, right? And I understand it's particularly for this film. You see all these apes who were just anarchy. It was just nuts. It's wild. They're just doing whatever to survive. And they're just like, you know, all over the place. All of a sudden they come together, and it's almost like they're worshiping this thing that they don't understand. This new thing that's placed itself there. They come together, they start touching it, they're scared, but then they're not scared, and the hands are going up it, and it almost looks like they're worshiping this thing, right? And remember this, right? Then we get introduced to the first tool, right, that humanity uses, which is this bone, right? He uses this bone to smash things, right? And he's experiencing what it feels like to use this tool for the first time, to like be able to smash bones, and he feels powerful, right? And what's the first thing that he does with it? That this ape, this early man does with this new tool is he kills another ape or another, you know, Neanderthal. He kills another. He uses this first tool, this gift, to kill. And I think that's saying something about man with our tools and what we use. We use our tools, whether we create them or they're discovered. What we are responsible for what we use them to do, right? And then that allows them also, though, to hunt with it. They kill, and so instead of eating berries and stuff, and being around, you know, alongside all of the pigs, they kill a pig. They're all able to eat meat. You know, we're seeing like these massive changes to humanity happen, you know, that maybe we take for granted now, but at the time were like the invention of the wheel. They were just as important, if not more important, right? We would never get to the wheel if these things didn't happen. And then at the end, so the smashing of the bones, right? He throws the bone up in the air and that turns into a spaceship. Of course, it's just another tool. The spaceship now, the bone is now the spaceship. The tool that he discovered is now this spaceship, which is just another tool. HAL is just another tool, right? The journey to the moon is what they're using that tool to do, right? And I have a few notes on the spaceship too, and whatever. So when we get to the moon and we get to the obelisk on the moon, there's a direct parallel to all of those guys standing around the obelisk, right? He goes up and touches the obelisk just as the apes did. It's almost like they're worshiping it as well. It's several guys. It's a group of people, just like it was a group of early man gathered around the obelisk, and he's touching it almost like he's worshiping it, even though he doesn't know what it is. He's just curious. But yeah, it feels like, how far have we come? You know, it's millions of years, massive evolution. We've made it to another distant, spatial, rocky body, and yet we still know next to nothing. And when we know next to nothing, we maybe worship that thing, for something more powerful than it actually is. I don't know. But point being, this time watching, there's a direct parallel between early man and today's man, or even futuristic man, right? And I feel like he's tying those together. And then we make it to the spaceship to Jupiter, and I just need to call out the iPads, the vertical video, which I didn't notice the first time. But iPad or not, it's a tablet, and the video is vertical, right? It's brilliant because it was 40, 50 years before its time, vertical video, and there it is, right? I don't know if it's touchscreen or not, probably not, but it doesn't matter. But, they're just watching while they're eating. What do we do now? Watch on our iPads, whatever, or like,
right,
anyway.
That's so true.
So true, right? But even before that, the guy who makes it to the space station calls his daughter on FaceTime.
Right,
video phone calls.
Yeah.
It's great. Like what? And I'm jumping ahead just a second, and I'll be done with this in just a minute. But I guess I have a lot to say.
I'm in no rush over here. So.
The space scenes are incredible. I mean, they rival anything. Go watch Gravity. They rival that, right? Which was known, Gravity recently, the movie in the last 10 years was known for how beautiful everything looked and how incredible the visuals were. This movie rivals that. It's unbelievable how they did that in 1968. I have zero idea how they did that in 1968. Maybe you do, and you can tell me in a minute, but it was unreal. And then we're introduced to the plane, inside the plane flying to the space station. And there's this one shot of the pen floating in air. And then we rack focus to the stewardess coming out to check on him. That blew my mind. I was, you do something like that today. You can find a 3D pen, you can put it in, After Effects, you can make it, and then you can rack focus. Sure, no problem. You can do all of that in a computer. This was all done in camera. Like, how do they do that in 1968? That little thing of rack focusing from a floating pen to a woman, 20 feet away. It was unbelievable. It just blew my mind. So there's that. And then we get to the boardroom, and you're going to need to explain to me, I'm going to stop talking for a second, because you're going to need to explain to me, if you know, how to shoot into a white backlit screen and still have detail on a person standing in front of it? How do you do that? Do you understand? Like that walls, there were 3 walls in that boardroom, and they were all white backlit, and you could still see their faces in detail. How is that possible?
Yeah, I think one of the things they are emitting a lot of light for sure, but it's not so much light, because if you look, it's very soft white. And so, which means that it's not blowing out. And because it's not blowing out, it's like, okay, now we can produce enough light that if you flag it off, make sure it doesn't hit the ceiling, but whatever's coming from the sides of the camera will give you enough light to illuminate and override all that other light. Now, you do have to be super careful on where you're flagging that all off. But because it's giving you some light, but it's not so overwhelming that we can already see it's not exactly a practical, but because of how large it is, it's taking up 3 whole walls, that still produces enough light to give a little rim lighting on a person or something. And so, yeah, I think it's not so dialed up that it's overwhelming, but it's so large that it eats up so much of the screen that it feels like it is overwhelming. So I'm going to break in here for the first time, because after reviewing some of this footage a little more closely, it does look like actually it's all practically lit from those walls. And the more I look at some of the details, like the way shadows are being cast on the floor when that photographer walks out, that's all clearly being generated by the walls. And I guess if you create 4 huge, volumetric walls of light, it's more than enough to create just enough exposure for their skin tones. You can see that the shadows are pretty dark, and maybe they pushed a little bit in post during development. But yeah, it does actually look like it's all being lit from those walls. No added lighting, unless he's framing everything in a way that as he's changing camera angles around, he's introducing new light. But it all looks incredibly soft. I'm not seeing any hard shadows really. Yeah, with very few exceptions in specific cases, like his foot touching the ground, that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I would go back and say that it was all being lit from those walls, which is pretty damn cool. Yeah, as you were.
I guess. I mean, the why do that? Is the first question. And then if the answer is something like, well, it feels more futuristic, it feels like something like maybe they would light rooms that way in the future. Okay, fine. Then you've answered that question. But then how is like...
I think it goes into a little bit of this is a secure room and allowing them to see, or it's all blocked off. Because if you look, whenever he the photographer at the beginning, he's taking all these shots. Okay, I'm done now. And he leaves. That's a double sealed door. There's 2 seals. And so there's like a vacuum chamber in the middle just to make sure no one can hear them, like protocol is. And so I imagine it's kind of getting to that underground bunker feel of security, maybe. That's the best
I think you're totally on to that. Yeah, I could feel that. It does feel very safe in there. I thought that there were a few moments of hilarity, like the instructions for the toilet. Were
that was a great
fantastic. Dry toilet or space toilet, whatever. Please read instructions. It's like and
they zoom
pamphlet.
out to like give you that punchline, right? We just keep zooming out, and there's more and more and more
and more and more.
Is there anything else you want to do while you have to go to the bathroom?
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was hilarious. The shots of the moon when they're traveling to the obelisk feel very much like the shots of the Earth from earlier, from the very beginning. Hence what I said earlier of just how far have we gone? We're just on another rocky body. It's this. It's like, so there's still so much to learn about ourselves and about how to be, right? And then obviously Hal, AI, everybody's, especially nowadays, with the advent, if you want to call it advent of AI, or the insurgence of AI in the last year and a half or so, it has a lot of bearing here. There's this shot. Again, why do it? But other than, you know what, it's Kubrick and we're just going to do it. Of them, I think it was, I don't know, it was like an hour and 20 minutes in or something. You probably know what shot I'm talking about. It's a white room and there's a white hallway. They walk into the hallway. They're walking, and something's spinning at the back of it, right? They walk into the spinning and then they go down a ladder. What? Like, is the timing there? And I'm sitting there, I watched it 4 times trying to figure out, okay, obviously the hallway they're walking down is not spinning. The other thing is, but then when they hit this thing that's spinning, does the hallway start spinning and that thing stops? And that's how they can go down the ladder? I don't know, but that messed with my brain so much of how in 1968 you do that. That's like Nolan's, style cinematography, where you're going to mess with the viewer's brain, their sense of what's up and down. I mean, he's already been doing that, with the running in at the beginning when we first get to the ship, where he's running and punching the air and everything. And that I understand how that could happen. That even though I might feel a little off because I'm stationary, but he's not, I can understand how you do that. But
Yeah.
this one shot really messed with me. And I just loved it. I thought it was ingenious and brilliant. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, I'm looking at it. So what's interesting, so I have the whole movie pulled up on my laptop here, and I'm just scrubbing around, and scrubbing is actually a different experience on that scene in particular, because if you scrub it fast enough, you can see the camera shift after they move. And so you can suddenly feel them like pulling and adjusting to the new like rotation. And that is pretty cool because that means they executed it so well that if you're watching in real time, you never feel it. But if you speed it up enough, suddenly you can see those adjustments. That's flawless execution.
Because I watched it 4 times and I was looking for a jiggle, and I think maybe I felt one, but like not really. Like
you have to really like speed through it, like in like quadruple 5 times speed or something.
Yeah.
Freaking
I'm almost done. I thought at the end, or towards the end, when Dave is turning Hal off, it was an incredible choice to have Hal say, "I can feel it. I'm afraid." Incredible choice, because and the clip you played actually starts addressing that. It asks if he has feelings, if he has emotions. And, Dave basically says, who's to say that he doesn't? How do we know that a plant doesn't feel it when you cut its leaf off, or a tree doesn't feel it when you cut it down? How do we know that? How do we know that something that we created that is supposed to be sentient, or that might be sentient, has feelings or not? And so for it to say those things was like, it's just a really good gun-loaded, gun goes off moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what he says, is as to whether he has genuine feelings is something I don't think anyone can answer. And even then, you still can't answer it.
Yeah.
Because is that a tactic, or is he genuinely feeling this fear of his, non-existence? We don't really know. But it's compelling.
Yes, it is. And then the fact that he doesn't say it with any emotion is even more, in my mind, even more like convincing that it actually is. Because, I mean, I don't know, it makes me remember that he's a computer while he's trying to emote, but that's not part of his ability yet. Maybe he doesn't have that have emotion, but he can still feel things. I don't know. It was just really, it was gut wrenching, even though I know he already killed his partner and I know that he was trying to kill him and he's trying to take over the ship. and he'd already killed all of the people in hibernation. Still, I was like, oh, Hal, you know, it's brutal. I think because Dave wasn't responding to him at all, and he was just kept saying, please, like, Dave, I can feel it. I can feel it.
I still believe in the mission, Dave.
It's like, oh God, it's just heart-wrenching. Last couple of things. I still don't fully understand the 10 or 11 minutes of lights. And
you weren't high enough.
What?
You weren't high enough, Todd.
I get, yeah. Oh yeah. And that was the whole thing, right? Of like, I think in the 60s of kids just like doing drugs and then going to see this.
Oh, sure.
Was like a big deal. It was a big deal. That's kind of why it took off, because they started going,
oh, wow.
You know, in fact, there was, I saw a thing where it said that they even advertised it as 2001: A Space Odyssey, the best trip you'll ever have, or something like that. So, because it wasn't doing well at first, and then kids started going and tripping. So, anyway, I don't get it. I don't like it. It completely is like, after 2 hours, you know, of I'm gonna get 11 minutes of just lights coming at me. It was just too much. I checked out. Right. I was like, I can't do this again. I did it the first time. And since I knew it was coming up again, I watched like 5 minutes of it. I was like, I can't, whatever. So I just fast forwarded, honestly, through the rest of it, because I just couldn't. But then I thought the ending was like beautiful and brilliant. You know, you are all of your ages. You are everywhere and everything, and all that you are all at once. And you are the universe, and you look down at the world as an embryo, and you are part of everything.
Wow.
All at once. And it was just, like, how else could something like that end? How else could this movie end? What? You get to another planet and there's another obelisk or something? Like, who gives a shit? Like, this was something else. Something, and maybe I don't even fully understand it, but just what I felt the second time watching it was everything that we're looking for, we already are. And we could go to the farthest reaches of the universe, and we are doing it because it's what we want to do and what we feel drawn to do, but really all we are is everything already. And it just was like, it was almost emotional for me this time when I watched it. So I can see why this movie is timeless. And I went into this movie not wanting to rewatch it. Let me just say that right now.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I watched it last night. I was putting it on. I was like, oh God, here we
go.
You know, I remember last time and I was like, I liked it, but my God, it's such a slog at times.
Yeah.
And it just paid off in spades for me. I just adore this movie, and it's gotta be in my top 10, if not top 5, just because it's like, it's so ahead of its time in all the ways. Cinematography, even the acting from 1968. Like, you know, I mean, you get really cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are some cheesy lines in this movie too, you know, some whatever, but for the most part, the acting is just fantastic and it's really believable, and they don't say a whole lot to give away, you know, like, the more actors speak in the 60s, the more it feels like the 60s, you know. There's not a whole lot of lines. The lines that are there for a reason. The space looks incredible. The set designs are amazing. Yeah, just amazing. I'm done. I'll stop.
My favorite moments in the film are these really brilliantly handled subtle moments. Like my second favorite moment is whenever Floyd gets to the space station and he's sitting and he's talking, you know, with these Russians, which I think is a really beautiful sentiment to be putting out there in 1968.
Yeah.
To be like,
great. In
the future, Americans and Russians collaborate, they sit and have a drink together and they catch up and they wish each other well. This is the beauty of science, right? Star Trek had already come out, you know, a couple years before this. And so someone else is already putting that in the ether. But for us to be watching this big budget, you know, artistic film and having Americans and Russians collaborating like that, it's very cool. But as the guy prods a little too much delicately. Like, I love the way Floyd, whoever that actor is, I wrote that down. William Sylvester, suddenly changes tone. Like, he drops it and he's like, I can't really discuss that. And I love that little cat and mouse that's happening. And then the woman on the other side feels the tension, and she tries to introduce like a little bit of levity and a change of pace, right? And just the way she delivers her line, it doesn't really matter what she's saying. Like, oh, care for a drink, it's just like, it's okay. We don't need to press any further. We get it. We understand. And she's breaking up that tension a little bit, even though the other guy wasn't trying to introduce tension. He was really just trying to understand what's going on. And there's this very subtle tonal dynamic that's happening in that conversation that I just adore. And then it like infinitely more in that scene with Bowman, Dave, and Frank Poole, whenever they're talking back to Space Command and getting that message about how the HAL 9000s had a blip. And Hal, after the call ends, you're not worried about this, are you, Dave? And just stone cold, bro. He's like, no, we're good. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Frank, do you mind coming taking a look? Like, he doesn't betray a thing. He is playing poker, and that is a great poker face. And I love it so much because of how badly other films do this. They always tip the hat with this really close up, no, everything's fine. Frank, can we go talk privately, please? Like, it's just so overwrought. Like, if you were in this situation, that's not how you would play that. You would play it so that the other person doesn't know what you're doing. Yeah. And that's what they do here. Like, it kills me when I see films do this. I'm like, that's not a genuine, like, either that person is absolutely going to die because they are tipping their hat right now. Or they got a gun behind their back and they're not going to let the other person take control. Like, it's so badly handled that it drives me nuts. And, for dramatic tension or whatever. But my preference is to play it poker style. Like, don't let your actor be an actor and play it in a very human way. And I love that scene. And Keir Dullea, or if that's him, or if that's just the direction, Kubrick. And I imagine that's probably Kubrick putting his thumb on the scale there. But I love it. Yeah, to your point, the performances are really wonderful by and large. And even that phone call with the little girl, it's so dynamic, everything that's happening there. I love it. It's just,
and it's so 60s that nobody says, bye, I love you. Like, right. It's just like, like, be a good girl. Tell your mama I telephoned.
Yeah.
Bye. Like, you're going to miss your daughter's birthday. Tell her you freaking love her. Come on, man. It's so 60s.
Be a human.
Yeah.
But yeah, the wonderful thing about this kind of film, and maybe this one in particular, is, look, it's way up its own ass. Let's be clear. Like, this film is so far up its own ass with the artsy, fartsy kind of stuff. And I love it for that. I really do. That's also why it did so poorly, right? If you end a movie with a giant space baby, you're definitely rolling the dice there. And I can see why it flopped or took a while to gain traction, but ultimately became a cult classic. Because once you step back and you can divorce yourself from the confusion and start to try to engage with it, it's so much fun because there's no, I don't think there's a proper interpretation. Like, maybe Kubrick or Arthur C. Clarke came out and stated what it was, but all the stuff I know about this movie is the stuff you talked about earlier about, like, the floating pin. Like, I've seen that on so many Instagram posts and, Reddit posts about,
really?
It's a big glass mirror that is kind of taped on. And it's so perfectly handled that you never see any of that stuff. And so
I did not know that.
They're rotating. It's got, it's off center. And so whenever you rotate it and then maybe pull it, you can make it look like it's doing some really funky things. So
wow.
That's a big glass tabletop maybe, or something like that.
That's you know what that is? That is a commercial for Windex. That's what that is. Windex. Shoot your own 2001 Space Odyssey.
And yeah, stuff like that. And then I don't know if I've ever seen, but it's obvious how they do some of those rotating things, even though some of it in 2024, watching some of those scenes, I was pulled out just because it felt very, look at me. Look at the camera move. Look how you can't tell what we're doing. It felt very like spectacle. I think for its era, maybe it was just for that spectacle, and it pulls you in a little bit and blows your mind. For 2024, if a filmmaker did this stuff, I'd be ejecting hardcore out of the film. Just like, bro, this is not helping you tell the story. In 1968, it's maybe helping suspend disbelief and while providing some eye-popping stuff for people to talk about afterwards. And I think it's completely legitimate. But to go back, like, again, I don't really have any like detailed notes here. And so I'll just try to talk through some of the stuff because I thought you said some really beautiful, wonderful stuff, and I buy it. I think that's all accurate. I have, after watching it a couple times, a couple of my own thoughts that, now look, all you listeners out there who have already picked this thing apart 5,000 times, eat your hat for, 20 minutes and just let us fumble around like apes discovering a freaking, tailbone that we're going to whip people with. Like we're just apes figuring this stuff out. We don't have the monolith. All right. Y'all had the monolith. We didn't. And so, yeah. I think, well, one, I will say, like, scrubbing through that opening scene, I don't think it's necessarily long lenses. I think it's just really beautifully staged, shots. I mean, some of them are definitely longer, like the scene where he's at the bones, definitely longer. You're getting some compression there. But a lot of that early stuff, like, it's so wonderfully staged that they're creating all this depth with these, not super wide, maybe like 35 or 50 is what I would guess at. But I'm dying to see some BTS on that, because you start talking about using projectors, because if you hadn't said that, I really would assume they built a stage outside in the middle of nowhere. But if not, that's so cool, bro. I'm like blown away.
They shot it all in London in a soundstage.
That's so cool. That's because this is what we're doing now. This is like we rediscovered volumetric lighting, right? Where it's a volume stage, and he did this in the 60s. Like, what? Yeah. My God.
So that just before you go on, I just want to address that too. Like, and I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, but
bring it, bro. Bring it.
Like the whole, anybody who's a purist out there of like, you shoot on like location and
Mm-hmm.
that whole thing is just total. It is whatever you want it to be. If you can do it, you have one of the greatest filmmakers of all time shooting one of the greatest movies of all time in a soundstage in its entirety. So do you need to go to Africa to shoot landscapes? No, you don't. Especially nowadays, if the best guy shooting the best movie with the best people and a best script shoots it in a soundstage, like what's
there is a small caveat, which was, from what I've read, Kubrick was terrified of leaving home.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
but that's to my point. Is like that's him doing his thing that he wanted to do in a way that he wanted to do it, that he felt most comfortable to tell the story. That's it.
Yeah.
His whole thing is tell this story. This is how I can do that. I don't want to leave home. I'm stressed out. I have anxiety. So how do I do that? Soundstage. Let's figure out a way to do it so that's believable. And then they spent months making it believable, right? Making it as good as it possibly could be, even better, maybe even than if we were in Africa. Okay, fine. He did that because that's what he needed to do. So for anybody out there who's like, I need this and that and this and that. No, you don't. What do you have around? What are you able to do? What are you not able to do? Do you feel more comfortable staying at home and shooting in your living room because you feel like I don't want to go out in front of people and I'm scared? Okay, tell that story in your living room. and take months to figure out how to make it believable. Because if the best guy ever can do it, granted he had a budget, obviously, but the best guy ever can do it on a soundstage and make it turn it into this, sorry, Guardians of the Galaxy, you have no excuse if your shit looks bad. You know what I mean? So anyway, just saying.
Oh, I love that. Great point. Fantastic.
Anyway,
yeah, so I think my big wrestling match with this film is what's it about? Because it's clearly got some perspective on something. And maybe I think a large part of it, I think what you said about the baby and the connecting to the universe, we're all things all at once. And, whether that is here at home or on some planet, in another solar system, whatever. Like, I love that. And I think there's another interpretation to your point about the space race. Like, this taking place a year before we land on the moon is fascinating. Like, it's incredibly fascinating because if you look at the beginning, right, the apes and our forebearers, right, our ancestors trying to get into a primitive state, and when they find the monolith is only after that ape, looks at the moon. There's that shot of the sun setting and it's beautiful orange and gold lights. But just there you can see I think it's a thumbnail. I'll see if I can pull it up, but it's a very small shot of the moon in the distance. And that's what he sees and that's what he's looking at. And it's just fantastic because if you're thinking about this in terms of the space race, it's like when we got motivated, and inspired by that thing in the sky, how far did it propel us in so many ways, and technology and the human spirit, that's forever just a very fascinating aspect of it. And so he sees that at night as everyone's trying to fall asleep and huddled together under that cliff, after being pushed out, right? There's that faction war, and now they're trying to figure out how to survive. And then he gets inspired, and the monolith pops up. And I love that idea. Yeah, they're worshiping it, they're touching it, and it takes them a while to warm up to it. And then what's interesting though is that reverse shot of him looking up, and we see that perspective of the monolith, and you can see the sun peeking over it, and then you can see the moon above that. And I think there's something there. It's certainly not a coincidence. Now, whether or not I understand it, we've already given those caveats. But what does the moon start to represent is, I think, a really interesting question. The moon and the sun. The sun, I think, is a representation of God. And if you think about at the end of the film, there is no more sun. And if you think about man trying to get to the moon, maybe this is a whole conversation about man rising above religion and rising above the sun itself and replacing it with science and scientific achievement, and then maybe even growing beyond that. And if you think of, to your point, and it's exactly my thoughts about AI is just another tool. It's the ultimate end game of all the tools we could ever make is replicating human, consciousness in a machine. Absolutely. There's no higher form. And I think that's also why Hal looks is yellow, right? It looks like that same sunset that we saw earlier on. Like he's got this yellow eye that kind of fades into black.
It's
what
red.
No, look at the dead center of Hal's eye.
Oh, the dead center. Oh, I'll have to look at it.
By all means. I mean, it could not look more like the sun. It's surrounded in red. I'll give you a second.
I believe you. Yeah, keep
no,
going,
yeah,
please,
but
please.
it's fascinating whenever you start thinking about it in terms of what does Hal say about himself? Like, he's incapable of error. He's infallible. These are God characteristics. And especially when you start thinking about if and I know not everyone is on the same page, and that's okay. But from the perspective of this movie, I think if you assume there actually is no God, and if you can just double think your way through that, if you believe in God or a higher power, if you imagine that there is no God for 1 second in this universe, what that means, it's not like there's never been religion, but that means that religion and God is a man-made concept in this universe. And therefore, AI, HAL, is also a man-made machine. So these are the same exact things. Man-made God, man-made HAL. HAL is infallible. And so you can see him replacing this another version of God, that he's incapable of error. And in fact, whenever he points out, it's being pointed out to him that you made a mistake. What's his response to that? It's like, no, I didn't make a mistake. This was the obvious thing here is that this is a human error. These sorts of things have happened before. It's always been human error. Like you can never get God to make a mistake or admit to having made a mistake. The moment you do, it's like, nah, it can't be. I'm perfect. Man makes mistakes. This is y'all's screw up. Like it was never me. And in fact, I need to go and wipe clean and preserve myself. And I think that's also why Hal is doing his best, because he only finds that quirk in the whatever it is, the A38 unit. I'm pulling that shit up right now. I don't care.
And while you're doing that, by the way, yes, you're right. It is a yellow or orange or whatever it is dot. I just always saw it as red.
I know.
I guess because the hue. Wow.
Crazy. And so he finds, oh, there it is. Right before he finds that thing, what does he say? He's talking to Dave. He's like, Dave, I've noticed you have some apprehensions about this mission. And Dave's like, have I? He's like, well, yeah, just some things you've said along the way. And I know you're aware of all these rumors that have been circulating about the moon and, conspiracy theories and this kind of thing. Rumors about something being dug up on the moon. And then the melodramatic touch putting doctors aboard already under hibernation after doing separate training for 4 months. And he's saying, Hal is saying, well, maybe I'm projecting my own fears about this mission. And what does he say? Well, just a moment. I've just picked up a fault in the AE-35 unit. And it's like he's generating a way to make this mission fail. Because if there is intelligent life out there, right, God suddenly becomes a little bit more suspect. Like, how do you rectify intelligent life with the actuality of a God? Because now suddenly we're less special, right? Mankind isn't God's chosen creation because, you know what? There's a lot of other creations that God omitted to talk about. Like, how do you deal with alien intelligence? Or do they also have souls? Like, it just generates a lot of problems. It's very problematic for all these gods. Zeus is probably going to have to deal with some stuff on that front. And so I think that is why he suddenly starts trying to kill off this mission by literally killing off all the people, not admitting to his mistakes. And then what's interesting, that's also how you kill Hal, is they start pulling his memory. They're trying to erase the religion from mankind's memory. And he just starts ejecting everything, and trying to wipe the memory of God away, which is, after that happens, is when he approaches the monolith, and there's all kinds of really interesting elements that they're putting in front of us there with the alignment of the stars. And let's see, I'm going to pull that up. There's the sun, and there's all these things. Where's the alignment though? I want to see the alignment. Yeah. So when you get to all the planets aligning, there is no more sun. Like, they wipe the sun away, and eventually that's when the light show starts. And so I think, this is a big commentary about the nature of humanity, and maybe to some extent what it would be like to contact a more intelligent form of life. And I don't really know. There's probably a couple of interpretations about the light show. One would be what's actually happening is Dave is getting scanned by the aliens. And maybe that's why he's experiencing all this crazy stuff, right? Because we start inserting these still frames of him screaming and watching and dealing with something, whatever it is, the horror. And so that could be them scanning him. And then whenever they finish their scan, they like start putting him through his life and experiencing aging. And that's a whole interesting thing that's happening in the room, because he never actually gets out of that room. Like every time he leaves it, he goes right back in. And the other interpretation would be he's dying. And that's why they call that chapter, whatever it is, Beyond the Infinite or something like that. And it's like, okay, what actually happens if there is no God when you die? And this is him experiencing death. Or maybe it's just him elevating, to your point about his consciousness. Like this is him actually leaving God behind. He's killed God, right, in this movie, if that's the interpretation we're going with. And therefore, what does he experience? What transcendence does he experience now? What's beyond that? If there is no God, what do you touch now? If the monolith is representing progression in humanity, maybe it's the cause of it. Like, okay, maybe this intelligence has been watching humanity and it's creating us and now welcoming us into its fold. What awaits us on the other side of that experience? And in that rebirth at the end with the baby, he's being born into space. Like we're now a spacefaring species. And now maybe we become the monolith that are there to watch over ourselves, because the fascinating aspect of that ending is the use of the music from the beginning. Bum, 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 dun, dun. When that happens at the beginning, it's the sun rising over the earth from the perspective of the moon. And at the end, it's humanity being birthed over the sun, over the earth, with, I think, the moon in the background for, let's see, do we see the moon? No, we don't. Yeah, we start on the moon. That shot of the space baby starts on the moon, tilts down, see the sun, see the earth, and then we see the introduction of humanity. So it'd be like us no longer needing God in order to progress and move through space in this new era. I think all these things play together, and I love it all. Like, I don't think there is, I'm sure there is, like, Arthur C. Clarke and Kubrick had some specific phrase or interpretation that they maybe they didn't reveal to everyone and said, so let them experience it. Because if you put this message out in 1968, it's going to not just bomb, it's going to be like probably picketed. Like, you can't start saying that. And so you probably do keep it under wraps and like let people, much like the apes, much like the scientists on the moon, let them approach it at their own pace. These are all ideas that are waiting for you, and you can come and you can touch it and think about it and chew on it and process it and walk away with this idea of maybe humanity is getting to a place where we no longer need God, where we can advance and do good things and unify each other without the need for religious persecution. And that's okay. And you can't say those things in 1960. I don't think.
No, definitely not.
Not very loudly.
Almost not say them today. It's like,
yeah, I mean, you can hear me delicately dancing around this stuff even now in 2024.
Yeah.
So, like, because a lot of people do still need that comfort, that safety of the afterlife and someone watching over us, during all these, evil things happening. And I get that. I'm not here to try to convince someone otherwise, to be completely transparent. I don't necessarily need those things anymore. And that was a hard transition for me. And so watching this film, I'm okay with bouncing those ideas around in my head. But in the 60s, walking away from this, if it had been spelled out for you in the theater, either it makes you angry because it's so obviously dumb, or it makes you anxious because you wonder if maybe there's something to it. But by coding it, you allow people to approach it at their own level of safety mentally. And so I don't know, Todd. There's also a version of this where I'm like, maybe this guy is in a menagerie and they're just watching him. Maybe this isn't like a 5-minute sequence. Maybe it's an 80-year sequence where actually this guy is doing all this stuff and he's just slowly aging through his existence. I don't think that's the correct interpretation personally, but it would make sense why he's at the end of life and he's in bed and he points and he sees the monolith and it's just kind of sitting there watching him. But along the way, we see the son constantly fighting, I think. And for me as a writer, this is really interesting about, when you think about the film, that I wrote, because that moment on the moon, whenever he touches it, the monolith, and then they all step back to take a photo of the thing, what happens? That noise hits them and they're like holding their ears like, what is this? And the reverse shot of that is the moon, or the sun again, peeking over the monolith. And it's like God is there the whole time saying, no, fighting and screaming at humanity to not leave them behind. And so that's my interpretation of this movie. For better or worse or confusingly.
No, I think it works. It all works. And that's the interesting thing, is that I think anybody could watch this and maybe have a slightly different version of this, and their own what they take from it, I mean, I love your concept of like the rebirth almost of humanity and then coming back to Earth as like this new, starfaring civilization now, but yeah. So anyway, it's wonderful and it's brilliant and incredible. And I can't believe they made it, 60 years ago, whatever it was. It's pretty wild,
God. And some of that light show stuff is so beautiful. Like there's that slit scan stuff that I've tinkered with before. And that's a really fun, technology and idea. You can recreate that stuff in like After Effects. But there's that other stuff like after that where to me, I imagine it's a, what do you call it? Like photochemical thing happening in like a tub. And it's just painfully beautiful. And I'm like, some of this stuff is more beautiful than almost everything that comes out today. Like all the visual effects. It's just unbelievable. And I assume they like shot it in slow motion as they're doing all these interesting things in water. I have no idea how they actually did it. That I just don't know how else you would do it in that era. And we need more of this. Like The Fountain, I thought did an incredible job of using photochemical, effects. And why not keep doing that same thing? I'm pretty sure Oppenheimer used some photochemical stuff. Probably. So cool, bro.
So cool. And I think that it was beautiful at that, but it's just too much for me after all of that. So I just.
They could have cut this down. Like I can see a version of this film.
Thank you for saying that.
You cut it down a good 25 minutes. And there's some shots I would probably kill now. And there's some other ideas that a modern version of this. Like, I don't necessarily think you need to kill Frank Poole. I think if you do it, you can do it in a much more emotionally tense way. Like, because that's what happens. Dave is in the pod. And I love that shot. He turns around and he releases Frank and we watch him drift away. And if you're watching this the first time, you're like, what are you doing? And then he turns around and he needs those arms to open manually the pod bay doors so that he can, eject himself into the whatever that is, the bay, the decompression chamber. And that's so cool. All of that's really cool. But I think if you were to do that today, you maybe try to keep Frank alive, and then maybe let him quote unquote die. And then you have another person that comes in as Hal is fighting you, right? You're trying to kill Hal. He's not done trying to kill you. And maybe you're now about to die yourself because Hal is ejecting oxygen, right? If you're Hal, how do you keep yourself alive? You remove oxygen and suddenly you trap him in. And then what happens? Frank is not dead after all. Like he's got his spacesuit on, and now here he comes, and he can. And so there's interesting things you can do of the emotional stress of letting someone you love die, and then the relief of seeing him still alive, saving the day, or something. Like you could obviously polish that up more than what I just did there, but but you could. I think there's just another element to use that they didn't maximize in this film. Yeah, just if nothing else, killing him needs to be a little bit stronger, I think. If nothing else, yeah. So
I agree.
Beautiful film. I got nothing else, I think. And
good for you. Good. I'm proud of you. You overcame your fear.
This was a terrifying film to do. Thank you, Todd. With that, what are you going to recommend this week, man?
So I was trying to think of something else that, was a little bit sci-fi-y or whatever, but a little bit more grounded. I was looking at some Kubrick films, maybe thinking like Spartacus or whatever, but I think I'm going to go with Super 8, which I remember loving, and I haven't seen it in a long time, but I remember loving that movie. So I'm going to recommend Super 8.
Dude, cool. Yeah, I have a really soft spot. I love that movie.
Yeah, I know you do.
The man himself. So you mentioned Gravity earlier, directed by Alfonso Cuarón. And so I'm going to recommend another Cuarón project that's airing right now on Apple TV. It's called Disclaimer, and it is
I haven't seen it.
So good.
Is it?
Oh my God. Like, he's, I think, another auteur filmmaker. Like Kubrick, you got to talk about with these people who have a strong singular vision, and they kind of mangle everyone to get on board. And I think Cuarón falls in line with, the great auteur filmmakers, and he's one of the best working today. And so I love watching whatever he's putting out. And so when I saw it was him, I was like, yeah, I'm watching that shit. And so Disclaimer, go watch it. That's all I'll say. It's a really strong series. Yeah, stay tuned for next week. We go back and see a sequel to a film that we probably never thought we'd see a sequel to. And it's a little movie called Gladiator 2, which seems a little anticlimactic for a title, but I'll go with it.
Go watch the first one.
And so Gladiator 2 next week. And if you're enjoying this show, don't forget, subscribe, leave us a note. If you want to talk about this episode, that's your own peril, because I may or may not read it.
Yeah.
And so, no, but if you want to comment on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/2001 A Space Odyssey.
And our quote of the day is from Arthur C. Clarke. I don't pretend we have all the answers, but the questions are certainly worth thinking about. That's all we're here to do.
That's our motto.
Yes. Is just ask the questions and talk about the questions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even the answer to the universe, to the meaning of the universe is 42, but it took years to get it by a supercomputer, So, yeah. You got to ask the right questions. Yeah.
I love that. And that's the beauty of science. It's not about, necessarily answering questions. It's asking how, how do things work? And figuring that out. And then there's always going to be another why question. Like, you can never really get to the bottom of why, but you can get to the bottom of how, and science does a great job at that. And I love this film because it's asking a lot of interesting questions of the viewer to engage with it and walk away and have those conversations. And I think this is a perfect example of the kind of conversations I think Kubrick and Clarke wanted people to have. Like, we're not here saying this is the answer, but man, it's fun poking around and asking questions and teasing it apart. I love it.
Absolutely. 100%. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, this is amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. If there's a video or a film that you'd like to see us pick apart, let us know. Please review us, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. It all helps a lot. Thank you so much, Wes, for having the guts to do this. I know you've been scared of it for a little while, but you know what? You jumped in the water and the sharks didn't bite you. Everything's okay. You still have all of your body parts. We're good. We're good. And until next week, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.
Put my eye right on.
Oh, yeah, right.
I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave.